so much, Shiv. I'm really delighted to be here today with you and to be invited to speak with everyone about my research on co-creation of the curriculum. I've recently completed my PhD at the University of Edinburgh, as Shiv has said, and I'm really excited to share a bit about practical examples of curriculum co-creation and then explore some of the implications around the potential for transforming student well-being. As Shiv said, we will take some breaks partway through, so I will present an overview of curriculum co-creation, then we will pause for questions. Then in the second part, we'll focus on the potential for curriculum co-creation with respect to student well-being. And then we'll have a longer time for questions and discussion at the end. First, I wanted to start by talking about two different main types of curriculum co-creation. And I've drawn on the work of Kathy Bovell and Sherry Wilmer, who have done some fantastic work in this area. So the first would be co-creation in the curriculum, and that's really during. So it's current students on a course working with staff during a course, and that's usually the whole class working together, and students are earning course credit as that course is proceeding. The second main aspect is co-creation of the curriculum, and that's often before a course with students who are not on the course right then as a matriculated student. So they're working with staff to co-create aspects of the curriculum, often for future students who will go through that course. And they tend to receive professional development opportunities or payment in order to compensate them for all of their work in this area. So now I'd like to focus on some very practical examples here of co-creation. So the first set during the curriculum while it's taking place could be students and staff having this ethos of working together and developing consensus on the content and or the pedagogy or the approach. So that could be negotiating the expectations, especially as we move to online modes of learning and teaching or hybrid with some students in the room and others online. So it can be really valuable to have those types of discussions as we navigate these new experiences, thinking about how the class can be taught to benefit to all involved, including all of the students and of course the teacher as well. You may also have obviously a focus of what you'll be studying during that course, but maybe the students could be more involved in voting if it's a large class, or if it's a smaller seminar, there could be open discussions about what specific areas to explore in depth. Then so moving on from the content and the pedagogy, there's co-creation in the curriculum where it's focused on assessment or grading criteria. So that's been really done very well with the medical students or vet students, for example, on student-developed multiple choice questions. And this helps students to learn about the challenges and how difficult it is to write very good multiple choice questions, but it also helps them to think in a new perspective about the content when they're developing these questions. This can also be done very well in the online format, and then students could be collaborating on this, and then the staff member would obviously have some oversight, and they could choose a few of the many optional options for the multiple choice questions that could be included on a later exam or on quizzes later in the term. There's also a lot of co-creation projects where students and staff are working together to enact projects that will benefit a community or a local organization, a school, or a business, for example. So these community projects can often go beyond the university, and it's really positive to see how they can have a great effect not only on the students and staff involved, but also on these community partners. And the last example I was going to present here was negotiating what grading criteria to use could be another example of co-creation in the curriculum. So you may have certain criteria I'm thinking of creativity as a really good one. Do students actually know what that would mean? How can you define it together? And how can you look at helping students to understand the grading criteria by being involved in co-developing it, seeing what really matters in assessment, and then that can help them do even better on an assessment when they really know those expectations inside and out. So in terms of examples of co-creation of the curriculum, there are some great examples of student projects or internships with a student who has successfully completed a course, may be selected to work with staff on a summer project or internship to focus on the difficult concepts. And staff members have obviously their own experiences and experiences of the curriculum, and they may think of certain ways of presenting these difficult concepts, and students may have some really fantastic ideas on how to develop other resources to help students understand these tricky areas from a different perspective, especially if the student has recently been through a course or a program. And another example is student consultants. So some student representatives do work very much in partnership with staff members and give feedback and have agency to co-create from a more external point of view, drawing on the feedback of their peers. But this could also include student consultants who are peer reviewers, and they could be a little bit external to the course, and they're sitting in to focus on how can staff engage students in the most interesting and valuable ways for other students. There's also other examples of student staff mental health working groups or other areas that are really of interest and high priority for a course or a program to focus on. There could be students who volunteer to take part in this and work actively with staff. I think the key for all of these is that students do have agency, that their ideas are listened to, and that they're active partners in this process. So a lot of the examples of co-creation of the or curriculum co-creation, I won't say of or in, but encompassing both types of co-creation, focus on collaboration, developing aspects of the curriculum. And in my thesis, I developed this definition to help to specify different aspects of how they work together. So it's a values-based implementation of staff and students working together. And this process is really important. So it's an ongoing, reciprocal, creative, and mutually beneficial process are some of the key areas of that. And they're negotiating and sharing decision-making regarding aspects of the curriculum. So now I want to unpack each of these different areas with you. The first area I would say is really this values-based implementation, and it's the ethos of how we're relating to each other in a course. So there are these four main aspects that you can see in the diagram on the right of sharing responsibility. So it's giving students that agency to be involved. There's this reciprocity and learning from each other, mutual respect and care for different types of ideas and expertise to improve the curriculum, and also having a sense of trust and empathy. So empathy for each other's lived experiences and the challenges that we're all facing in this current moment is especially important. But also the trust may be built, of course, throughout the term of working together. But it's important that individuals do trust each other. And a student participant in my research described this values-based implementation about how it was about how everybody would come and work with skills or some knowledge, and it would all go towards one goal. So it's where you can learn from each other and you can move forward in creating something good for both of you, more than just your individual use. And I really loved that quote for helping to sum up these areas of the values that represent the ethos of co-creation. Now, some practical examples for how you would demonstrate these values could be just demonstrating care or compassion in all of your interactions with students, including your emails. Some students said they really took the time to craft careful emails to their lecturers last term, and they said, I hope you're doing well in this really challenging time. And then they received responses that didn't even acknowledge that, or didn't say, I hope you're also doing well in this challenging time. And they felt that that really demonstrated a lack of care and compassion. So just being careful in how you word things and in your emails, demonstrating that I hope you're also doing well. We're all in this together, and it is a tricky time for everyone. I know online we're all trying to jump in and focus on the content and the skills and the abilities that students are supposed to be learning in terms of our learning outcomes of our courses. But having an icebreaker discussion board can go a really long way for helping students to really develop that trust and empathy, as well as care and respect for each other and for staff members. I've seen it done really effectively when individuals are sharing pictures of their working space, or they're sharing a photo in a creative way, or just talking about their aspirations for the course. And they're sharing those values and their own lived experiences in those icebreakers. Then another practical example could be creating spaces to focus on active sharing of articles, websites, or news that relate to the course discussion. So these could really invite some examples from different intercultural perspectives, from different international backgrounds that students may have, or relevant news items and things that are topical and coming up that relate very closely. So this could be considered a shared space that is relating to the course content, but isn't exactly focused on the discussion boards of the readings for that week. But it could be done in creative ways with a Padlet or a Twitter hashtag, and demonstrate that sense of community throughout the course by remaining up to date and sharing things that sound a little bit interesting and fun and relate to the content as well. Also, it can be quite overwhelming to present online and deal with making sure you have a fantastic experience for students online and in person, and responding to the discussion boards. So when you have a moderator, that can be extremely helpful. And if you don't have a teaching assistant or other staff in the room, the online room working with you, you could think about whether there's some students who would like to volunteer. They could take turns on this. But could they help you out with this throughout the semester, throughout learning and teaching online, and summarizing some of the discussion points that are coming up online that could be really helpful for you, but it could also teach the students some valuable skills at the same time, and create that sense of community to bring the students online and face-to-face together in this new period of the hybrid learning and teaching. Also, course-related social events or drop-in sessions online can go a really far way to demonstrate values as well. The next area I'd like to focus on is creativity, and this really came through in my research about these new spaces. So as participants were talking about traditional teaching, you sort of knew what to do. You would do the essays, or the students would do the essays or the exams. They were familiar with a lecture or seminar or tutorial type way of working and interacting. But they felt that curriculum co-creation opened up these boundaries, and they were more open to diverse perspectives in terms of ways of working or learning from each other. And creativity is really drawing on that shared resource of everyone in the room, seeing students as a great resource as a key part of that. And it's focusing on creating materials or learning experiences as a whole, and seeing, as this participant has said, seeing the whole as being more than the sum of its parts. And I think that's a fantastic way to think of creativity, to not put pressure on you to think of, oh, what can I do that's all novel and creative, or I don't feel like I'm a creative person. But the sense of openness can go a long way to demonstrating creativity. And some examples are not only recognizing that expertise that everyone is bringing, but how can we redesign or think differently across all of what we're doing especially in the online environment, in terms of projects or assessments or how things are taught. Flipped classrooms can be really great for creating up those spaces when students are watching videos and then coming together with a live session to discuss themes that may be something that is surprising to you, that students really want to fixate on a certain aspect of what they're learning. Obviously, there are parameters to that, and I'll come back to that in the negotiation slides that are following on from this. Some other examples are in an online space. I think some individuals have said they felt like they're more creative by using different online tools, particularly those that focus on collaboration in the online environment, like Padlet or Google Jamboards, or moving away from the traditional essay or exams, but through creative assessments. Like project-based learning has worked really well in the current period to give students more autonomy to craft these projects and get them off the ground, with the expertise of staff members as well supporting that experience. Blogging and videos are also some other examples that can promote a lot of creativity of students, and it helps staff members to learn in new ways from their students too. In terms of negotiation, this is really like two-way communication and feedback about the mutual benefit and how we can all benefit from this course or program. And that's obviously the fourth section I'll come on to next, is the mutual benefit. But in terms of negotiation, that can be, as these participants are saying, it can be not us and them, but coming together. So it's this us. What are these shared values? What are we working towards, these shared goals, to get us into new spaces, to challenge ourselves and learn from each other throughout this term? So it's getting rid of the us and them barrier. Obviously, it's good to be clear about your expectations of students, and students can be clear about their expectations of each other and of you too. But it's good to be clear about what can and cannot be up for negotiation. Obviously, courses have gone through rigorous quality assurance processes ahead of time, and there can be some things that are more up for negotiation than others. But it's really opening up those spaces to have those conversations that's important. And if students are suggesting things that maybe aren't possible, that's the co-creation. It's not just a student-led curriculum, but it's coming together to have those honest discussions about what's not up for being co-created. And coming back to these values about respecting all different ideas. Maybe there are some fantastic ways that are great for learning and teaching that you haven't thought of before, that students are presenting or that they're learning from and engaging with in their other courses. And it's, I think empathy is a good, important part here about understanding each other's lived experiences. Some individuals were telling me they're really struggling between the synchronous spaces and creating that sense of community with a live learning and teaching experience, but also balancing that with accessibility and inclusion for those students who have other commitments or who don't have a strong Wi-Fi or need to share devices with others in their homes as they're going through their course. So they may not be able to join those live sessions and have to join in the evenings or late at night when it's quieter. So having empathy for that and negotiating together what works best for everyone in the cohort, or the majority at least, can be a good way to have those conversations about how we can learn best and teach best in this current period. And this really focuses on reciprocity, and hopefully everyone is contributing and benefiting from that process. I've seen in my research that there is quite a lot of mutual benefit, and there's this great synergy, as this participant has said, and collaboration between staff and students. And I think it's important that this process should be rewarding for staff as well. And there can be some really great academic relationships that are developed throughout a term by working more closely and sharing responsibility with students. So some great areas of development that both students and staff were talking about focused on communication skills, teamwork and collaboration skills, especially for students. That was very important in terms of their employability. But also for staff, they were feeling like they were enhancing their courses, their programs, and they were engaging students much more and in deeper ways. So they were finding that this process was very beneficial for them. Oops, I'm sorry for the shaping having two eyes here and that typo here, but it's this mutual beneficial process is about sharing responsibility for projects. And as I said before, a lot of these projects can go beyond, and it could be, especially in the online spaces, developing blogs or Wikipedia articles or videos that sometimes students will want to share more broadly with the wider world to benefit others, so that their research or their projects can go beyond the class environment. So I'd like to pause here and ask for any questions. I think Shiv and Heather may be collating some questions. And if you haven't posted any on the discussion board just yet, feel free to ask if you want me to clarify any of the areas. And this diagram for me really is trying to focus on the four main areas of the values, creativity, negotiation, and mutual beneficial process. And focusing on how we're working together to share and negotiate decision-making within co-creation. And hopefully it's a little memory jogger for any of the areas you want to return to in this brief question and answer period. So I'll pause there and see if there's anything coming in.
Thank you, Tanya. That was a very informative and thought-provoking first half. And like Tanya said, can I ask the delegates to share your thoughts and comments in the chat function box, which is available. And please post your questions as well. And our Twitter hashtag is Teams Wellbeing. So please continue to share your comments and thoughts. Let me go to the first question in the chat function right now. Does co-creation work differently in different disciplines, Tanya? And how might it work in mixed disciplinary groups?
I think it really lends itself very well to mixed disciplinary groups or to interdisciplinary learning. My research took place, I should have said this previously, but it was across 5 universities in Scotland and across 8 subject areas. So it did range from the social sciences to the sciences and also to medicine and veterinary medicine. So I think obviously there are different disciplinary norms, and some have professional programs and expectations and qualifications that students are working towards. So there will be different parameters maybe of what's up for negotiation in different disciplines, but definitely in an interdisciplinary field and in the social sciences or areas like focusing on climate change, the social and the scientific aspects of climate change. I've seen some great examples across disciplines of all of the values, the creativity, negotiation, and mutual benefit do tend to relate across different subject areas. And I tend to think of it as this ethos and or partnership ethos and how we work together. So it can be adapted for different contexts, and also it's adapted for the individuals who are engaging with it. So it could be very different in terms of small classes or large classes, but I've tried to provide a range of examples that I think could work in a lot of different disciplinary areas.
Thank you, Tanya. And we have time for 2 more questions. I'll start off with another question, which is in the chat function right now, and then I'll pass it on to Heather, who might have another question. So, did you look at the use of any specific co-creation or co-design methodologies?
I was doing a part-time PhD while I was working full-time, so it has been a long journey since 2014-15, and I was drawing on original definitions of curriculum co-creation at that time that were focusing a lot on the work of Kathy Bovell, who later joined Edinburgh and became one of my PhD supervisors. But I was really using these open definitions of collaboration between students and staff and sharing agency having this shared responsibility and respect for each other. So I tried to go out through the QAA conference, but also the Sparks conference, publications, different other publication presentations, and word of mouth to identify individuals at various universities who were engaging in curriculum co-creation. So I tended to use a very open definition. I think there were limitations to finding individuals. I think it was less of a buzzword at that time than it is now, and it's great to be seeing the students as partners and curriculum co-creation fields developing over time and becoming so popular today. But at that time, it was difficult to identify examples, but I did find 15 different initiatives of these staff and students working at different universities in Scotland. So I think this definition does relate to all of them now, and it's great to be seeing how the field has changed over time. Does that help to answer the question?
Yes, absolutely. And we've got more questions coming up, but we do have time for one more question before you continue on the second half. I'll just pass it on to my co-host, Heather Gray.
Hi, Tanya. Thanks very much for the first part of the session. It was very informative, lots of information to look back on. Just a question that's coming in from Julia was, do you have any advice or findings to share about how to be mindful of the potentially unequal power relations within co-creation? It could be between staff and students, or there could be other different power dynamics going on. So have you any advice about how to be mindful of that so that obviously we get the best participation and engagement from all participants?
Yes, power often comes up in discussions of curriculum co-creation and partnership. And I tend to think of students as partners as this larger umbrella term for wider work, including the curriculum, but also extracurricular activities. And often it can be easier in the extracurricular sphere when you're not dealing with assessments, for example, to share power. But within the courses themselves, I think there's so many great examples out there. I think it is creating this ethos, and we need to be mindful that different individuals, both staff and students, have different comfort levels for taking on responsibility and agency. Some individuals, some staff members may want to share less or share more, depending on their discipline or the number of students they're teaching that semester, or depending on what else is going on for them in their careers. So I think in terms of students as well, students should be supported in this process, and I think the ethos and the values go a long way to help students feel that this is a new way of working, perhaps, that they may have not engaged in before. I think we'll come on to that in the second part in terms of the challenges in learning and teaching in new ways. But being open in terms of that negotiation about what can and cannot be negotiated and what individuals feel comfortable with can be really powerful in helping to share power.
Well, that's great, thanks. Yes, I hear what you're saying about the values and setting the kind of the boundaries and the expectations as well. So I think what we'll do just now, Tanya, if we maybe carry on with the second part of your presentation, there are other questions coming in and we can collate some of those for after when you've finished. Thanks very much, back to you.
That's great. Thank you so much for those initial questions. And I look forward to hearing more at the end as well. So I've been working on a recent publication with Kathy Bovell based on some of the findings in my research, and I'm really focusing there in that work with Kathy on student transformation. And these are 5 areas that we were focusing on for student transformation, and I think a lot of them relate very closely to student well-being and how it can enhance student well-being. I'd also like to come back to the idea of staff well-being as well, and thinking that this should be a really positive experience for staff at the same time. And a lot of these themes, obviously not the later ones around academic achievement and student retention, but the themes tend to relate, the first three tend to relate to both students and staff. So I'll focus on these 5 areas in this next section. So the first area is developing positive relationships. And Kathy's come out with a recent book on the relational process and dialogic process of having that close interaction between students and staff who are working together throughout the co-creation process. And students and staff both talked about how these relationships were so pivotal to their co-creation experience. These relationships can also be, as others have also published on as well, like Kelly Matthews and Sam Dvorka and others have published on that relationships can both be one of the most positive aspects and beneficial outcomes of co-creation or partnership work, but it could also be one of the most challenging aspects and seem to be an inhibitor in other examples. But getting these relationships right is really important. But it's really about coming together to develop that relationship. And I think students are feeling that it has a big change on how they interact and how they see their role as a learner. So this student here is talking about having that relationship and close interaction with staff members, that they're held accountable for more. So there's less room for her to casually do her work, do the essay or exam, for example, listen to the lecture. So she's feeling that she was more passive in those contexts, but within curriculum co-creation, there's more trust and more accountability. So now when she's writing an essay even or sitting in a lecture, she hopes to have a certain amount of responsibility to make sure it's the best work I can do. And I thought that was a fantastic way of putting it. And there are many other examples from participants about the relationships, the positive synergies, like we heard from the staff member earlier. But those relationships can go a long way in care and empathy and compassion for one another that can help make a course feel really rewarding and have long-term benefits and make us feel more comfortable in challenging ourselves or even in getting through very challenging situations like we've just had with COVID-19 and working remotely. And of course that continues. So those relationships can really help student well-being, but I think staff well-being as well. I'd also like to focus on engagement and enjoyment of learning and teaching. So all of the 15 examples I was looking at, some were co-creation of and some were co-creation in the curriculum, but all of them who were doing co-creation during their courses were saying that this was the best course throughout all of their degree program. And all of the other students were talking about this being a really significant learning experience and extremely positive experience if it was an extracurricular activity for them. And I think that sense of engagement and enjoyment goes beyond the NSS and the student satisfaction, but it's the enjoyment of it is really leading on to more and more engagement, and students are intrinsically motivated to engage. One staff member was talking about students coming several hours early before a class to work with their group and to work on their projects. And he said that never would have happened before if they hadn't felt so invested and if they hadn't become passionate about their project. And again, that comes to agency and responsibility, that when students are given this responsibility, they have been wanting to live up to it and to make it the best work possible, as we saw from the other student previously. So that motivation and engagement has gone a really long way for students. And they've also felt that other members of the learning community, including staff, cared about the students, and that helped students care about what they were learning and what they were engaging with. And that sense of enjoyment also comes on to later aspects that we'll look at in terms of student retention. So there are many challenges, and we talked very briefly there about sharing power, and this can be a different way of working for many individuals. And in some senses, a lot of participants were talking about how it represented dealing with authentic and real life situations. So I gave some examples earlier of that ethos and working together and navigating it by sharing responsibility with students to say, what are our expectations for each other in this COVID-19 era, and how can we work together to make this the best learning and teaching experience possible within the parameters this term. But also the student projects, when they're given responsibility to work on projects for partners. There were some great geosciences examples of trying to promote biking in a local community, and students were out there talking to community members, developing this project that would then go to be considered by the local community. There were also other examples of students teaching in schools, so they were learning about climate change and then teaching primary and secondary children about climate change, or there were other examples of enhancing the course that students were on. But all of those had real life implications for the wider academic community and even the community beyond the university. So it was great that students and staff were together collaborating to find solutions. Climate change is a fantastic area where I think co-creation really comes into play, along with many of the other great challenges facing our society today with the coronavirus itself, the social, mental health, and let alone the scientific aspects of the coronavirus, but also of thinking about poverty and inequality. All of these are very challenging areas, of course, that we haven't found easy solutions to. So how can we work together with our students to break down into a small digestible piece, a project that could work to address one of these large areas so that we're all working together? So this can be very challenging to work on these areas or to even build trust within the learning community. But a lot of students and staff were talking about developing resilience, and that was really beneficial, of course, beyond their learning community. And this student is saying, so the staff members, along with the student, were saying that they were planning very highly for all of the different directions that a course could go in a term, but the students, according to this participant, felt that they were lost. And then slowly you would see everyone taking their roles, dividing a project, and thinking about the purpose of the module was to develop and have transformation in a larger sense. So developing skills and capabilities that would really go farther for students. And that wasn't comfortable, and they acknowledged that that wasn't the purpose of the module. So what it was about engaging together, not being afraid of saying what you have to say, that's important and relevant and respectful for the learning community, but trusting other people and of course respecting other people in that process. So there are other challenges, of course, that we could go into in the question and answer period. But I think especially moving into the online sphere, as many of us are right now, that will involve some taking risks and overcoming challenges. And the more we can work together with students to help them feel part of the solution, the better in helping to support all of us. I think it was really fantastic to see some examples of academic achievement. I was working with fairly small samples, and I should have said earlier in the question and answer period, I was identifying these 15 examples of curriculum co-creation, but of course there must have been others at the time that were happening and taking place behind the closed walls of classrooms, but maybe the individuals weren't presenting on them at conferences or publishing on them, or I didn't hear about them via word of mouth. So of course there are other examples of curriculum co-creation, but it was quite hard for me to identify them at that time. And it's great to see the dialogue and the sharing happening much more around labeling things as partnership or as curriculum co-creation. But in terms of the examples I did look at, it was amazing to see some great examples of academic achievement. And again, this comes back to the enjoyment and intrinsic motivation and engagement that students were feeling during the course. So staff members are talking about how students are achieving the highest marks they've ever received throughout their university career. And they felt that that was not because they were marking them higher or inflating the marks, but it was because of this intrinsic motivation that students were feeling that they actually excelled themselves. So a challenge here could be time, and co-creation may take more time for students, but some of the participants were saying it doesn't feel like work when we're so motivated and enjoying it so much, and we just want to get stuck into that and have the best outcomes possible. And in that process, they're excelling themselves. And other staff members are talking about this transformational effect and how it was particularly for students who would not normally get first degrees. So it could be for students who were quite good in other areas, but they may not excel in terms of their grades, in terms of an exam or an essay, but in terms of working together through the group work or through more creative forms of assessment, students felt that they were able to show off their best side, to learn in new ways and challenge themselves, but also tailor the course to how they felt they could learn best. And that had a transformational effect, and many achieved very highly in their courses, which was great to see. It was also quite powerful that there were two examples. This was quite small, and I'd love for others to study this more around academic achievement, but student retention as well. But there were two examples that I thought were very powerful, where students were considering dropping out, but having the example of a course with co-creation where they would have more agency and responsibility. That was very motivating for them, and they were looking forward to it. So that's why student 10 in this example stayed and didn't drop out of university. And then there was another example that a different staff member from a different university was talking about how a student was quite bored with the initial stages of her degree and didn't feel that the learning and teaching resonated with her personal experience or her life. So it wasn't motivating or engaging for her, but getting involved in the co-creation project was what stimulated her and what motivated her to stay and not withdraw from university. So of course, these are just two examples, but I think it has a huge effect on student well-being in terms of academic achievement and retention at university. So I think I'd like to pause there. It's 11:15. These are a few examples of references that I've drawn on heavily, and some of my own publications and my recent thesis at the bottom there. But I'd really like to focus on these 5 areas of the potential of co-creation for promoting well-being, especially in the COVID era right now. But I'd like to turn back to the discussion and chat boards to open this up for more questions and discussion about any of these areas or other areas that I've talked about today. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Tanya. So you'll be pleased to hear we've got a few questions to put to you just now. Okay. So some of the questions from the chat. So there's one from Greg here. Yeah, quite a lengthy one, but I think hopefully you'll pick up on it here. So Greg says, I like the idea of student content creation. Did you find situations where students found it hard to know what they didn't know, or whether the information they found was useful to curriculum creation? So does the instructor give guidance along the way or set parameters at the start, let the students know where they're going? Quite a lot in that, but you know, if the students don't know what they don't know, you know, how does that work into co-creation?
Yes, definitely. So I think in terms of the aspect of that co-creation, I think we definitely need to recognize the expertise that staff are bringing to the table here and to their learning and teaching. So it's not about deflating that in any way at all, but it's recognizing that expertise that staff have both in teaching, in their many years of teaching and pedagogic experience, but also in the subject area. But some students actually said it's great that, well, that you don't know what you don't know, but that they felt that they were learning so much more about the complexities of things. And earlier on in the experience or in their degree program, they felt like they just needed to go and learn that specific content to succeed. But then later through the co-creation process, they learned it was much more messy than that, and that there was so much more out there that they didn't know. But that was actually really positive for them to explore with staff members. And I think there were definitely great examples of co-creation of content. Particularly during the summer projects, there was a great example from the medical school with a student working with staff from information services area to develop 3D models of parts of the body that later students would go on to explore these 3D models and to think about how they relate to the course content in their medical degree in different ways. There were also some great examples from other courses of student projects that they were presenting on. So some students were presenting openly to other members of their academic community within the university, and others, there was another great example of students developing posters and based on their projects, where they were opening that up to secondary school students who would then come into the university and have an open poster session where students would learn about these projects and ask questions. The high school students would ask questions of the undergraduate students. And that was a great area for collaboration. Obviously, we may not be able to do that in that current era of having large groups in a hall together. But I think there are some great examples of ways that could be done online as well.
Okay, thanks very much. I've got another question here from Claire. So did you at any point look into how the wider organisation supports or enables co-creation? And then if not, how do you feel we can gain more buy-in at institutional level, for example, from quality departments, etc.?
I think this definitely came up, and it was mainly in the challenges that individuals were mentioning. So often there was quite good buy-in at the higher levels of the university, and even in mission statements and learning and teaching statements are often mentioning student partnership agreements or working in partnership or collaborating or co-creating, co-designing. All of these catchwords that are coming up now are often included at the higher levels of senior management in universities. And some staff felt that they really did need great support from their line managers within their academic departments to be able to have this freedom to open up things and share responsibility through co-creation with students. So I think there are quality assurance processes that are very important and there for a reason, but the more that we can write module descriptions, for example, that can be specific enough to be fair and inclusive and be accurate about what students will be doing throughout a semester, but also the more that those could be written in ways that open up that possibility of co-creation seemed to be the better ones. So there were some issues around boards of studies and interdisciplinary courses with one school or faculty needing to own the course. So some staff members felt it was harder to work in an interdisciplinary way, even though they felt that co-creation lended itself to interdisciplinary learning. As I was mentioning earlier, there can be structural aspects of university processes or boards, for example, that may pose some challenges. And a lot of these staff members were trying to think of how we can overcome these challenges. And they felt like having a supportive team was really important for that. also, a lot of these individuals were or tended to be pioneers of curriculum co-creation over the years, and they were really sticking to their values and engaging with teaching and learning that were authentic with those. And they felt that their courses, in terms of academic achievement and retention, students presenting their projects at conferences or publishing on them, all of these were great examples that they used as evidence to get others on board within their department or within their senior management to support them in doing more of this work. So I hope that helps a bit.
Yeah, that actually leads quite nicely, segues into my next question actually, because not all staff might be open to or keen on co-creation, as a principle or practice, but, maybe believing that they're the experts, linking back to our previous question. So any other top tips other than what you kind of just said there actually for convincing staff to engage in co-creation practices, and should we be looking for everybody to engage, or is it enough to have a critical mass? Just what are your thoughts on that, Tanya?
I think Kathy Bovill has actually done some great work on this area, and in one of her recent articles, she was talking about this ethos shift, and I think that it is such a valuable experience that it's great to have these opportunities for co-creation. So I think I've said before, and I think she's also said, that there should be these opportunities for students to co-create the curriculum, but it's definitely not something that can be done easily throughout every single course, and nor should it be on all cases. I've tried to provide a lot of examples, especially earlier on, that are scaffolded. So some involve less sharing of responsibility, less sharing of power in terms of an icebreaker discussion or a Padlet or Twitter hashtag of sharing news. It could involve a lot less sharing than co-creation of grading criteria, for example. And in Kathy's earlier work, she's promoted this learning and teaching ladder of responsibility that a lot of individuals may be familiar with. And it's ranging from no interaction and no sharing of responsibility on the bottom to all student-led at the top. And co-creation is this negotiation that's more in the middle. But there are different aspects of where it's appropriate and where people feel comfortable to share more and less. So hopefully that gives some examples. I think it has been so powerful for the individuals involved, both for the students in terms of their well-being, their confidence, especially, and empowerment, and in some cases their transformation, to engage in these opportunities. And I think it is great if there are some examples where students can engage in higher levels of co-creation, in terms of sharing more responsibility with staff, but it will vary in terms of what we can share with students throughout different contexts.
Thanks very much, Tanya. I think that's probably all the time that we have at the moment for questions, but I take it people can probably get in touch with you as well if they've got other questions. So if you can maybe move on to your next slide, Tanya, just now.
Yes, of course. Well, thank you so much for the discussion today. I've really enjoyed it, and do feel free to get in touch via email or Twitter, and also on the Wellbeing hashtag as well for today's session. But thank you so much, and I look forward to continuing the discussions and hearing about all of your work this term as well, especially if you're embedding co-creation into your practices in different ways. So thank you.